Hi, this is Paul, and I have a conversation that we set up a while ago, and I am really looking forward to this conversation. A while back, Paul Allen, uh, on a Friday live stream, mentioned some ideas he had about universal basic institutions, sort of riffing off universal basic income, which is sort of rippling through the culture now with AI fears and all that kind of stuff. And that caught Rod's ear and it caught my ear. And Rod was like, I really want to talk. I really want to follow up about that because Rod is a true believer in institutions. And we were just talking about this. Paul had written sort of notes on this idea that he had sent to me and someone else. I thought Rod was the third person on that, but he wasn't. So Rod hasn't had a chance to see this much longer document, which I read, but there was another shorter document, just sort of a little taxonomy. And as we go through, but I might put them up on the screen, share screen stuff with Zoom. But I want to begin, Paul, and have you sort of walk through this idea and I thought it was really helpful in the much longer piece that poor Rod didn't get a chance to see how you connect that up with fractals, because one of the real questions in our culture in this sort of libertarian phase that we've been through was what does my marriage have to do with your marriage? And I thought in that document you made an argument that these institutions actually go up and down through the stack. And for that reason, um, performance on the personal level that seems seemingly disconnected to societal performance is actually connected. And since you're an economist, you got real fancy words for this kind of stuff. And yeah, why don't you just kind of walk through that, and then we'll go from there.
Just we're since we're embodied here, we have the poodle who is hanging out up close and personal. So we're real. This
I
this is
I
a
always
real
say
live
any
stream.
video with a dog is made better for it. So
Yeah. So
Is the poodle also an economist? I hear they're very intelligent.
the poodle strives to be an economist. No, the poodle tells me she's in charge and she tells me when she wants to walk and whatnot. So there's something going on there with the hierarchies. Um, so universal basic income is a response to something like the meta crisis. Um, sorry, I'm like I I think slowly sometimes, Paul, and you have to put me on double speed. Um, so the problem is that income is that which is coming in, and it's not basic. So basic just means similar to foundation, fundamental. It has to do with the base of something that which is at the ground of it. And income can't be basic because it's reliant on the where it's coming from. And so the response is, well, we need something out there that puts more stuff into us. And that's not a basic solution. That's not a basic response in my mind. Um, and so as a result, what is a basic, what is a basic response? And so my view is that a base is also talking about a hierarchy. It's there are layers which are being built on top of each other. So my liver has cells in it which do something, which remove things from my bloodstream, which then allow the rest of me to do my thing. And then so my liver cells are participating in my liver is participating in me, whatever me is, which this cloudy thing, which is me. And then I am participating. I am the liver cell for something else. Um, And I'm really asking, all right, I'm the liver cell for something else, and that could be the liver or that could be the larger corporate. And so within that fractal, what am I most directly participating in? What's that one layer up from me that I am engaging in this fractal scheme? And I think that is the basic thing. And I my conjecture would be that basic thing is needs to be autopoietic. It needs to be self-sustaining within the system. It's keeping itself alive. It is traveling through time. It is not dependent on specific cells within the organism or specific individuals within the institution. It's something that sustains beyond, that allows for the churn within the institution while maintaining the purpose and the body of that institution through time and space. Maybe something else, but that's adequate here. So universal. So universal. What is going to be relevant to all people? What are the kinds of things that we are all participating in as a artifact of our common humanity? These sorts of configurations of body and soul, or body and soul being in order here, and a breath. What are the necessities of that, and how does that arise into these institutional things? And that's universal, basic, that tier up from where we are right now, where we are as individuals. So we know that the institutions are interacting in other things, and there's hierarchies above that. And I think we'll probably end up talking about that at some level, but I think that's not the focus. And then what's an institution? I think I covered that. That it's a vessel for communities, something that holds the thing and allows different drinks within it. Different. It's not what it's about. I'm going to do the thing. The can is not about the product placement. No, the can is not about the I love this can and it's a great can. But without the can, I would have a mess, and I really struggle to drink this really delicious beverage. But if I look at the can, like, there's a whole bunch of really interesting things going on. It's designed to go stack on a pallet. It's designed to be built from rolled aluminum in a particular manner, that it's part of this institutional thing. That's all, like, there's so much in this can, and like I can easily unseal it with this little tab thing, and whoa, there's a bunch going on in the can. So what is the metaphor there? The detail, the specifics of the institutional forms matter. It's not about the institution. It's not about the institutions. It's about the thing within the institutions. But the forms of the institutions allow for the delivery of the really delicious beverage to me on my back patio, hundreds of miles from where it was produced, and so it's a vessel. So there's, and all right, so I've rambled enough, and where am I confusing, or where am I unclear, so I can clarify?
Well, Rod, why don't you let us know why this grabbed you when you first heard universal basic institutions?
In customary fashion, I have shown up without having done the homework. I just learned about 30 seconds before we came on that there was a 7-page document that I probably should have reviewed before we had this conversation. Um, so I'll be winging it a little bit, but I do have a lot of thoughts about it. I also, it kind of reminds me of that conversation you and I had with Mark Parker when we were going to talk about marriages. And I'm talking to two guys who've been married for like 35 years. And I get on there and I'm like, you know what? I want to concede defeat before I start. I got two very smart guys on here, um, both institution men for in different ways. Do I remember correctly, Paul Allen, that you actually worked for the Fed at some point, right?
I, I don't know if the Fed would like me to claim that, but I was an economist at the Fed for 5 years. Yes.
Talk about the ultimate institution or one of them, right? And I'm like I could not be more opposite of that. I basically, you know, I did the bare minimum of college. I graduated. I got my bachelor's degree, and I'm like, okay, box checked. I did the risk analysis, risk reward analysis of doing any more. I'm like, that's it. I'm done. Right? That's enough, right? So I'm coming to this conversation very differently, with a whole different perspective. I've avoided institutions, frankly, most of my life. So, however, that does inform why I jumped on your. It was all it was the phrase, right? That's all I needed. And Paul, you might remember one of the first things that I remember you saying, maybe it was in one of our early conversations, or maybe you said it in one of your videos, but you said, and it turns, I learned later you were quoting somebody else, but it was without individuals, nothing happens, without institutions, nothing lasts, right? And in a similar fashion, I grabbed onto that. Like that sounds right, right? So I've been interested in that since we've known each other, and I guess probably before, but it certainly catalyzed my interest. So when you mentioned that, I'm gonna call you PVK and I'm gonna call you Paul, just so we got two Pauls in a rod here. As soon as you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds right. So where I was coming from, the universal basic income idea was addressing something like we agree that everybody needs an income. So it's more like its universality is like, oh, everybody needs this, right? Because we've created this economy where you kind of need an income to participate in all the other things that you're going to need, shelter, food, etc., right? So that's what made it universal, right? And the basic part was sort of like we're going to give you some kind of floor where you won't go below that, right? Um, lots of things you could say about the logic of UBI, but that was the core idea. And so what I was hearing when you were saying that, and you can tell me if this was what you were thinking, was you were basically saying that institutions were similar, which is there is a basic human need for for institutions. Without them, in the same way that you would starve without an income, without institutions, we will at least culturally or spiritually starve, and that we need to think of it in that way, right? And so that's what I took from what you were saying. So maybe that's my first entree into how we might talk about.
Well, and I think that's, having read the paper this morning, I think that's right.
Rub
And
it in,
and
Paul.
sorry. It was my fault that you didn't get the paper. It's my fault. I was a bad facilitator. Um, but I was also a typical student, is that I read the paper right before we'd have the test today. So, um, but I very much was thinking along the same lines that you were, Rod, when Paul mentioned that idea, universal basic institutions. And what I liked about the paper was and I hope you give me permission, Paul, to use
Go
that
for it.
paper in my videos a little bit, because I think there's a lot of really great stuff in it.
You,
Um, because
I can pitch the paper at some point if you want. Well, go ahead with what you're saying. I
but
can go more
but
detail into that part. Go ahead.
okay, but what I really liked about it in terms of the basic that Rod clicked off, and you really articulated this nicely in the paper, unless there is a participation in some of these basic institutions at individual levels, there's not only you have I called Rod a business guy in one form, and he uh, he he reacted.
Way to
So
hurt a guy. Jeez.
there's not only a cost at the individual level, or at, let's say, the smallest container level, which might be a nuclear family, but there's also a societal cost. And I come to this I spend a lot of time around conservatives now, and I've never identified as a conservative, even though a lot of people would look at me and say that I am. But I, for years, heard people say things like the family is the basis of the society. And I'd hear that and I'd wonder, is that true? Is that true? It doesn't say that in the Bible. I'm a Protestant. And it's also the fact that if you want to have a book in which actually finding a really loving, functional family, don't look in the Bible. They're pretty much all a mess. And especially at the beginning of the Bible, where we have, in some ways, the closest look into families, which are the patriarchs, they're they're unbelievably bad. And so I would often hear this, but your paper and this argument, and also decades now of looking at different cultures and as a pastor watching families, um, is sort of won me over in that as right now, I mean, I just made a video about Scott Adams' death, and it's been fascinating me watching, what I've known of his life. Here's someone who is twice divorced. His first ex-wife comes in and sort of steps into the picture to do some facilitation. There's no clergy around. People are sort of making these things up. The ritual that they have is the sip, and I am not going to be dismissive of any of this, because one of the things that I learned as a pastor is that when people have zero institutions, they either suffer horribly or they make something up quickly to fill the need. And however you might critique what they can what they can make up on the fly, I'm not going to disparage them because they need it and it's better than nothing. But that doesn't mean that we ought not to avail ourselves of the wisdom of the centuries in even a Darwinian sense. I think that's part of what Jordan Peterson brought onto the conversation, is that these things that we look around and ever since the 60s have sort of been casting off. We say, oh, this is arbitrary, that's arbitrary, that's arbitrary. How do we know that, in fact, some of these things aren't evolutionary, and that for years people have been tinkering with these institutions and trying to get the forms right? And while that process continues, and now as technology continues to disrupt us in many ways we can barely recognize, that the process isn't just, well, let's just throw out marriage, but what are we going to do with that institution? And if we just throw it out, are we wiser for her? Are we richer for her? And not just us as individuals or us within a family unit, but us as a society or as a civilization. And so I thought your schema that perhaps a civilization requires universal basic institutions for there actually to be a level of human flourishing that, if we grew up in a really wonderful, wealthy, stable place like the three of us did, we just sort of take for granted.
The the genesis of the paper was my wrestling with utilitarianism
Hmm.
and trying to understand what is the ethic of fractal participation. Why? What is the responsibility, and what is the good, and what's a good group, and how do I do the good? And I mean, and I lay it out that there's really three things. I think the good is stewardship of that which participates in you. So I'm going to take care of my liver. Um, I'm going to take care of my lawn. Uh, uh, then there's and then if you're a corporate governor, then that has different meanings. You're going to take care of the corporate which you have been provided stewardship for. And then the second is I am going to participate in the institutions in I will participate in alignment with the telos of the institutions that I am participating in. So I work for the bank. The bank has a telos to provide responsible lending to enable our customers to do capital projects and all those sorts of things, or banking services that allow them to transfer funds, whatever. And I will act in a way that is in support of that mission. And as you both know, there are people within institutions that can very easily work for their own well-being within the institution and divert the resources within the institution to their own fund. And that can happen in a marriage, that can happen in a church, that can happen in a bank. So I am willing to go out on a limb and call that bad.
Well, corruption.
Or corruption, or corrupt. Yeah, yeah. I would
It's a
say
good
that.
word for it.
Well, and I think Luke Thompson's in my ear. He would say it's inevitable.
Oh,
Calvinist that he is.
I would say that the part of the institutional forms are to handle that, because you know it's going to happen, and you need to know what you're going to do when it does happen, and how do you reconcile that. So a lot of these things around, we could say a lot about creeds, but church discipline was the topic on Luke's thing, or just discipline generally. It's a lot of like, all right, there's going to be places when someone is acting corrupt, we need to prune them. And we need to have a process for that. And we need to have an authority for that. And it's sad, but we need to, and part of the institution is, okay, I need to know what to do when that happens, because somebody's dealt with this before. And so it's going to be part of the institutional forms. HR, HR at any company, or I think there's that in the corporate world, sort of a lot of that legal and HR is a lot of this forms that are for policing that sort of thing. And we have the anyway, all right. Okay. The third thing is I want to participate in institutions which are themselves good. So there's a recursive thing, like my family's participating in a broader community. My local grocery store is participating in a broader corporate configuration of grocery stores. So there may be so I guess the example I use is, you can be a really good accountant for the mob, but if you know that the institution I am participating in is undermining the institutions it's participating in, it's a recursive formulation. So if it's bad in that it's not being a good steward, or it's any of the three, if I come to realize that, then I have to find a way to withdraw myself from that participation, or attempt to reform my institution, which is, both of those are messy. But I think that, and then we get this recursive thing where there's something happening in Somalia that's really bad. And if I am properly participating in organizations which are doing good, call it some nonprofit, or some local faction of a nonprofit, which is then funneling funds up, or the Catholic Church, hopefully in that participation, and I'm not saying that the solution is the Catholic Church, I should say the Catholic Church is an instance of this is exemplifying this sort of thing, where my participations in the small local, and it has recursive participations, and someone in that line has the capacity to do something about Sudan, or what have you. And so then I have to, and my focus can be on the proper participation in forwarding the telos of the things that I am most basically participating in. That is to say, the universal basic institutions, which are yeah, so it's an ethical responsibility for me to participate in them and participate in them well. And within the ethical framework I'm laying out. I mean, you can disagree with the framework, uh, but then there's also a really easy audit you can do. What what are my participations? What am I engaged in? Am I acting in alignment with that telos? Is that institution acting in alignment to the extent I can see? Because I can't really see that far. But does it seem to be aligning in a telos with its participations? So I think, and so in that spirit, sort of, I laid out some things here which are sort of a taxonomy. And would you like me to walk through these, Paul, or do you
Sure.
want to talk about them?
Yeah, because we've been fairly abstract,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we're
This is
probably going to have to talk about institutions, but I'd like people to have a sense of, okay, what might be examples of what universal basic institutions would be, and how, in fact, do they scale?
yeah, yeah. And so and this is just these are my reflections. So it's open for iteration and people to respond to and change and make better. But like there's kin, and I use kin because I think it wants more than family in that sort of that broader family. What's the function? I mean, it's basic to our biology. We have children, we raise children, we take care of our elders, we provide this insurance across each other. So if my brother's having a rough, my brother's had his crops go badly, I'm going to share some of my crops with him so that we both survive. There's that, and that's an agricultural, but but I think that kin is basic. And then there's the workshop. Like there's some things I can produce myself, like I can cook an omelet. What I can't do is produce the pan to produce the omelet. So there's going to be production of widgets or services, bank loans, pans, pens, like that's going to be more complicated. That's going to require a institution to produce. The sophistication is beyond what I need to do. So there's these institutions that are production institutions. I separated those from the market institutions, which are, where do I go? I have things I have to offer. I want I there are things that I need. And so where do I go to make those exchanges? Um, and this is really, it's so below the waterline for most people. Like, oh, I go to Amazon, I go to the grocery store. It's thoughtless. Um, but if you look at history, and if you if you look at some of these studies on developing countries, like adding a bridge across a waterway to shorten the distance to market can greatly increase the wealth of a village. There's like these network effects that come out of markets that we are so thick in market where we are, we forget how basic it is to how we operate, and how not having markets is incredibly problematic. I think you can supply chain economics lingo, yada yada. We saw some of that recently with some of the supply chain interruptions over COVID. I keep moving. Academy. This is one that am I have the toughest relationship with. Preserving and sharing knowledge. So schools, libraries, estuary. Um, how do we pass on what we know from generation to generation? Um, there's a lot there, but I'm going to skim over it. Uh, I think the gym is really important, the gymnasium. We're, I guess, where the academy is, where we are intellectual beings. So a lot of these are about physical needs. Now we're at intellectual needs. What do we do to keep expand our minds and keep the knowledge, sustain the knowledge base that we have? And then how do we sustain ourselves physically? Um, and I think historically this was probably less important as people doing more manual labor on their day to day. But I think this is of greater importance as we come to realize that a lot of our work is intellectual, then we need to be more proactive on the physical. Forums, I'm going to say the homeowners association is the perfect example of the forum. We get together to preserve security and order as a small group. I can go to my city council or my neighborhood association or my HOA, and they are going to do something about the local order. And this intentionally is not national government, because I'm not really I'm participating in my homeowner association very directly, but I'm not in my national government in a meaningful way. And then the temple, which orients us and instills an ethic. So I view worship as orientation, that which we set up, which we put ourselves in. We glorify, I guess, as worship, we glorify that thing. We're literally putting it at the pedals. We're putting it at the pedestal. That's the thing we are focusing on. And in getting that common focus, then we can start moving things in the same direction and aligning our senses of purpose. And we know these organizations. I think it's the churches. I think it's also like the Elks Club and those. I'm gonna say the Masons, although I think a lot of those organizations fill this sort of that void. They are temples, in a way. But yeah, and the rest of this is sort of examples how the vessels, sort of the components which hold the thing together, and examples. Again, this is not complete. And then in the last column is discussing about the meta crisis, and we have part of our meaning crisis, meta crisis, is that a lot of these things are undermined. So I grew up in a steel town, and the steel town is no longer steel town today. And there's a lot of workers who were on it. They did the thing where they produced the steel and they did the blast furnace, and that was their life. That was their workshop. And that workshop was completely undermined by globalization. And that workshop is now reduced to rubble along the Ohio River. And not saying, and this is not to say that globalization bad. It's just saying that was an important institution for those men and their families, and now it's not there. And so the rapid change in technology and the social change is changing these fundamental participations. All right, I'm sounding like a professor now, so I will hand it off.
Rod, what are your thoughts about these about this? This you did
What
see.
I did. I have a lot of thoughts, but one sort of question for you, Paul. Under temple, would you include things like museums, concert halls, theaters, those kinds of places?
Why do we go? I think the question is, why do we go there? And if we go there for entertainment, if it's peripheral and it's a distraction, I think it's not a temple. But if I see everybody, if there were a theater and there were a line of people attired, waiting long hours, attired in odd garments, so that they can participate as a community in the seeing of the thing, there's a liturgy around certain cultural icons, and I mean, Marvel or Star Wars or what have you of that variety. I think those sorts of things um, have that, and I think within a certain circle, like uh, do we go to like a Puccini, like the opera? Do we go there because we find we are worshiping in the opera some sort of aesthetic ideal? Then I think maybe it can take that on in that orienting function. Um, or do we do it? Yeah, or do we do it because yeah, I'm struggling on both sides. I think there are definitely people who are religious about their opera. Not many, but but there is that group. But I think the fanaticism around, or I'll say enthusiasm, um, just because the etymology is just so beautiful there. The enthusiasm around Star Wars or Marvel, uh, where you have a rich mythos, you have a participation in that mythos, you have a community surrounding that which you engage with. It has many real, and it's orienting. Like these are my heroes. I am taking on this mythos, and I want to participate in that mythos. I think there's a religious thing there. I'm making it much more low culture than you were, Rod. But how do you feel about that answer?
Well, I have art museums in mind in particular.
Oh, well, sorry, I went somewhere else. Go.
No. I was general in my question. I asked museums and concert halls, some of these beautiful old theaters, for example, that have been lovingly restored at great expense, and um, but art museums in particular. I remember both my wife and I love going to art museums, and I've basically my entire adult life, whenever I would, travel to a new city on business or whatever, I'd make a point to carve out a couple hours to just visit their local art museum. So I've been doing it for a very long time. And so I have I've watched the way people do art museums. And I remember it was funny because one of my last visit to New York, I went to the Met and Metropolitan Art Museum, and this is probably 18 months ago or so, not too long ago, but long after all of the COVID things had long passed, and they're still wearing their masks. And there's still a very liturgical way in which you approach a piece of art. There's all the, I'm just watching this partly with all the stuff that I've picked up around here. I'm just watching this as kind of, an amateur anthropologist going, this is quite religious actually. And you can almost tell by the way the staff moves that they're almost moving like they're sacred space, right? And the posture, and they all seemed a little angry to me, frankly, but that's another point. But
You never find that in church.
that was what was informing my question, because I had that specific experience, and then I kind of broadened the aperture to think of these kind of sacred spaces that are you walk into one of these beautiful old theaters, and your gaze casts upward, and you feel kind of the awe of the beauty of the space, and I don't know. That's why I thought it might fit the category that you're describing.
Are they worshiping, in your opinion?
That would derail. I actually have all kinds of thoughts about this. Uh, the answer would be something like the arts will save us. Um, and I always ask my artist friends, like, how many artists do you know? Are any of them gonna save us? Um, but in that world, there is a kind of reverence for the creative act, right? And of course, they have their saints too. All of the dead artists.
They're gods.
Well, and then of course they've been dethroned with the whole postmodern modern thing. So, it, but I would say that yeah, they have something like a belief that we and I have to say, by the way, if we get to this, I've been doing a fair amount of institution building in my life, right? I told you I avoided them all, but that's mostly because I just like would rather just start something new than um, and so I've spent a lot of time in the world of the arts and creatives and I am sympathetic to the sensibility that there is something about beauty that you know at least holds out the potential for something like a highest good, right? And I do think that that's at the heart of that. But of course, like so many other things, it's been badly corrupted, right? So it's complicated. I could say a lot more, but I don't want to derail the sort of the core point that we're trying to chew on here.
Well,
I'm trying to pull something up. Just a sec. Go for it, Paul.
I don't think you're derailing it at all, because I like where Paul began with this, because okay, we've got this meta crisis and we feel instability. AI is making us nervous right now. And so the way to address this is universal basic income. And of course, when I hear it, I think about the people that I know who are already on selective basic income in the United States, like disability or Social Security. And I immediately see the deficiencies. And the deficiencies have everything to do with this broadening that Paul gave us with universal basic institutions. Because if you think money can solve everything, I don't think you've seen anything in this world, because I've seen very wealthy people who are impoverished, and I've seen very poor people who can live very rich lives. Now, what's interesting is that the category that you zeroed into, Rod, and the way you zeroed into it is has everything to do with the conversation of the last 500 years with respect to, well, what is the church for? I was recently, for the first time, in the great state of Alabama, and I conducted a wedding for a young couple that had been together a number of years and decided, partly due to the influence of this little corner and the estuary movement, decided to, in fact, participate in the institution of marriage. And I was very happy to be able to participate and facilitate that process. While I was down in Alabama, for the first time in my life, I attended the ballet. And the shock that I had in attending the ballet was that it was being hosted in a PCA, that's Presbyterian Church of America. This is a conservative offshoot of the PCUSA, the old main line. I participated in it, and it was a remarkable, it was in this massive sanctuary on this massive stage. All of the young women and young men, way, way more young women than young men participating in this ballet. All of them were um, students at the Christian school, and it was a phenomenal performance. And I thought it gave me an insight, because I grew up on the coast and now I live on the other coast. And I thought, if I were to go to the ballet in the New York metropolitan area, I would see a fine ballet. I probably never went to one because it would cost a lot of money and we didn't have a lot of money. Ballet wasn't on my parents' radar either. But there is a connection here. And so I think, Rod, your instincts are correct, but you're exactly right that that is a very big, very long conversation that has everything to do with the last 500 years. Because the truth is, when I went to Italy a couple summers ago and I went into church after church after church, what did I look at? I didn't go there to hear a sermon. I looked at Michelangelo and I looked at the masters. But when I go to Southern California, to the Getty, which I love doing, why does the Getty look like it does, and why does the Louvre look like it does? There's a world going on here, Rod, and I think your instincts are pointing
Well,
your nose in the right way.
and the Getty famously more impressive architecture than the collection itself. Again, he had a lot of money, but not necessarily the best taste in art. Maybe that's improved over time. But even the Guggenheim in New York. I mean, you walk into the Guggenheim, it's got this beautiful central lobby with this kind of spiraling hallways that go up to each level, right? It's an absolutely gorgeous building, right?
But the
Uh,
Getty
eh,
architecturally is not the Vatican.
no, but it's high design, right? In
Right.
each case, every time somebody builds a new art museum, we keep ratcheting up the expectation that the building itself is somehow going to be this, well, sacred space, basically. In many cases, the collection is not that impressive, but the building, wow, right?
But the Vatican has both.
Yes, no, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And the Louvre for sure. Yeah, yeah. Many of those old art museums are just they're stunningly beautiful and they have, beautiful, beautiful historic collections. I
Paul, can I share real quick? Share screen.
Oh yeah.
I don't have permissions. But
Uh,
go
let me,
continue, Rod. Sorry.
um,
well, no, go ahead, share. Like this is your conversation. I have a lot of things I
Oh,
could say, but I want
I,
to
I
serve your
was
conversation.
I think I think here we go. Um so I just pulled this off of Google Maps. This is the I this is a church where I was involved in the art design. This is at ASC at Arizona State. This is the Newman Center. So this is designed for students, and it was all this art was done in the last 10 years,
It's
which
beautiful, Paul. Yeah, it's beautiful.
it's I
complete
mean,
with Christmas trees.
yeah, and I think this was taken 22 days ago. So I think the is it I think people can disagree on like the styles, but I think the point we're the, the church and art have this long relationship. And if you look at the architecture in Phoenix through the last 50 years, this is sort of a new move where we're going to go with this ornate, large sort of. I'm not. I'm going to butcher all the styling stuff, but going with this sort of traditional, more of a traditional feel in the design, in the art, and the building is not not a it's not a stone building. It's a modern construction building, but I think the people want this. They're looking for an artistic expression in their liturgy, um, and it's bringing them to worship. So how do people interact with a space like this? Like I've prayed a lot in this church, so I know, like, you visually look at the image, there's all sorts of symbolism in it, and it becomes a focus for reflection upon a certain mystery, like the central image, the kingship of Christ. It's going to be a central image. So if I'm looking at a Monet, there's going to be a similar contemplative process where I am I am trying to have a conversation with the visualization that allows me to transcend my own imagination and enter into cultural language, the artist's language, which is being portrayed. And so I I think the whole purpose here of sharing is the church is an art museum.
Well, you're proud of your work. You should be proud of that. It's a beautiful space.
I I am not going to overstate my participation other than showing up to committee meetings and talking about things I like. But and there's I'm gonna mess up the artist's name too. So there's but the focus. So I think people to be oriented, want institutions that allow them to transcend. And I think the art museum can do that. I think Marvel movies are trying to do that. And I know the church is doing that since for me and other people I know. Um, so, but what is the there's a communal element to the church which allows it to continue. Unfortunately, the Marvel movies have gotten worse and the fans have fallen off, and there isn't the body to sort of sustain that. And the art world has, I mean, these corporate institutional bodies which are sustaining it. So maybe there's a communal aspect to that, but is yeah, so I guess the audit would be what's orienting myself. Where do I go to try to transcend my day to day and participate in something bigger than myself? And is that like living stones, or is that my church that is beautifully painted in a very symbol rich liturgical setting, or is it the Guggenheim? I think my thought is, all right, we need to each understand where we are getting that transcendent. And I would boldly make the claim that not all of these are created equal. I think the the incentives of the guy making Marvel is not to create a beautiful artistic space so that people can engage themselves and create meaning and create purpose in their life. People are doing that, but mostly people are trying to cash in on, oh, I can make a lot of money doing this. And so I, Paul, you can disagree with, I think
I think
there's a corruption.
I've seen plenty of artists who, certainly say why not both. I think most
There's
good
churches too,
artists,
but
churches too, most
yeah,
good
yeah,
artists, they don't get into art for the money. They get into art for this aspect. And it's also true that, I mean, we have this taxonomy here,
yeah,
but I think about Kuiper's sphere sovereignty, but all of these things bleed because marriage, for example, as a vessel, as a container, has its aspect that participates in the economic, that participates in the academic, that participates in the forum, that has even a market element to it. And so, on one hand, we certainly have a taxonomy, but the it's helpful to reminder that vessels in the wild are multifaceted things, and certainly temples, museums, the arts, these are all multi-aspectual realities because just about everything in our world that is real is multi-aspectual. They have many aspects and they participate at many different levels.
I I would like to revisit why I got so excited when you dropped that phrase, Paul. And I often feel like I'm sort of the skunk at the garden party when I show up at these conversations, TLC. It's usually about some religious topic, and I'm, trying to keep up and show interest and be polite. And um,
You don't
obviously,
want to see your fancy church, Paul.
I thought it was beautiful. Like I spent 10 days in Paris years and years ago. It was my first trip to Paris years ago. And I'm like, if I lived in Paris, I'd be in church every Sunday. Like it was just, I just went to every church I could get to and all the museums. I just loved it. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. Um, but in all the marriage conversations, I've been in a bunch of those, and I would be the guy saying, "Hey, look, I love marriage, but I think it's in trouble," right? And that was kind of, to summarize, that was my, I was trying to be a kind of gentle skeptic, but supportive of like we gotta come up with something here, right? And the so the concept of universal basic income is an acknowledgement that there are threats to the basic survival of lots of people because of all the developments we're talking about, right? AI being the most, salient. And so you acknowledge that, like, uh-oh, there are forces at work that are undermining the value of traditional work and we can't just let people have nothing to do. So that's a proposed answer. And Paul, I 100% endorse your take on that. Probably not going to go the way you think. Besides being highly inflationary and all sorts of other things. What do you do about real estate? It's not fungible. What do you do? You just reset zero. It's like, so okay, now what do you do? Rents immediately go up by $1,000 a month or whatever. So but the point is there's an implicit acknowledgement that we need this, and there are larger forces at work that are threatening, just a basic income. And so this is a proposed solution to that. And then you come along with universal basic institutions, and of course, I immediately in my brain frame it the same way, which is there are forces at work, they're larger than any of us, that are eating away at the foundations of so many of the institutions that we have come to rely on for the society that we all love, and benefit from, and therefore we need to have some kind of an answer for that. And I've kind of started thinking about churches almost as like civilization builders or sustainers. I think many churches might be well served to think of themselves that way if they don't. I will often say I'm not as interested in the doctrinal distinctions, but I am interested in the function that the church has served in community, in the glue that holds a community together, right? My mythical medieval village that I'm, pining for. So, but in order to have that conversation, you kind of need to get to the heart of why so many of these institutions are losing faith with the people who they're supposedly trying to help. And you started with a little bit of that when you talked about corruption and trying to deal with that, but it's also just rent seeking. It's also just the status that you gain by being involved. Like, you go to Yale and now you can say that for the rest of your life. There's all these non-monetary advantages. You elbow your way to the front of the room and you get into, get on that committee, or you get to influence policy. And the people doing that, they're convinced that they're doing the Lord's work, right? They're in many cases, they're not what we would call corrupt or whatever, where they're overtly thinking that they're somehow taking advantage of the system for their own gain, at least
They're
not
true believers.
self-consciously.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so probably the three of us would get lots of agreement, maybe not on every single point, but on most points, that the institutions are also failing us in all kinds of ways. So I would almost argue that the threats that we're all seeing and acknowledging are in some ways hastening a kind of deconstruction that at some level is kind of deserved, right? In the music world, everybody's worried about Suno and AI and what it's going to do to creatives. And I'm like, well, I mean, it goes all the way back to pop music. It goes all the way back to here. I know the formula. Get to the chorus in the first 30 seconds and these three chord progressions. And we know what you want. We're going to get even more of it and harder, right? And the whole industry is built around the song, right? You got to get the hit song, right? And the cynicism that's underneath that, the abstraction away from the sheer love of the art of it, right, is you've already embedded in it the thing that's going to make you susceptible when you turn on the radio and you can't tell whether it's AI or not, right? And so you sort of deserve what happens to you at some level, right? Because you don't actually believe in what you claim you believe, right? So that the, the that to me is so much more. I don't have a solution to that, by the way, but that to me is so much richer as a question, right? It's like from within the institution, the ethos to perpetuate it at all costs, and what that has cost its relevance to modern life. So many institutions, the reason why they're losing relevance is because they have ceased to be relevant, right? They have become overtaken by rent seekers. They've been there many decisions have been made. That's what the secrecy in the church was, right? It's like we can't let this get out because it's going to damage the reputation of the institution and so forth. And you pointed to the conversation this morning, Paul, on Luke's stream, uh, also talking about just the ways that institutions are no longer, the technological component to that, right? Where you have options. If you have an unpleasant experience, you just take your business elsewhere, right? Um, so, in a sense, that's such a big conversation that we could be chasing rabbits down trails for the rest of our conversation. But particularly since you both are devout religious men, and I think the church is such a critical um, civilization builder, it seems that at least I need to bring that up, right? Because that's what I was thinking when you said that. It's like, okay, do we agree that there is such a thing as a universal basic institution? Do we agree on that? Um, it, it, do we agree that there is at least such a thing, even if we can't point to one that we all agree is one, say, right? Just do we agree at a conceptual level, right? Because of course that goes back to where I started with you, Paul, which is UPVK, which is that as soon as you said, without individuals and without institutions, I thought, yes, right? And whatever it is I've devoted my life to, how many of them end up as institutions? Well, who knows? Depends on how you're going to use the definition, right? How many of them, live beyond my lifetime, for example, or whatever, right? Or is there a budget amount? If it's over a certain budget, is that now an institution? It depends on how you're going to evaluate that. But I have been basically devoting my life to finding ways to build organizations, start them and build them to address what seemed like obvious needs to me within various communities, various projects, right? And it's kind of like I got on the marriage conversation. Hey, I love marriage. I think we're in trouble. It's not like I don't love institutions. I actually would challenge Luke on all institutions are inherently demonic. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not so sure about that, right? I actually have some quibbles with that position. But I do see the critique, right? So anyway, I've said a lot. I'll stop.
I, I'm I'm gonna there's the mytho. So your concept of religion kind of bringing these things through time. I jokingly think about that as like the Ark of the Covenant. It's the vessel preserving the covenant that brings it through time, and it's that symbol, that symbol.
Throw some
And
mana in there so they don't
so
forget.
yeah, if it's the
Absolutely.
manna, the law, the rod. uh, uh, Rod, you didn't know you were in the Ark. No. uh, so the the mythos, people are going to hate that, but the story that we tell is not about the greatness of us. It's about how we messed up again and again and again and came back to the path. Um, that's the story, at least. I'm preaching to the preacher now, so it's dangerous. But I think if the story was how great the church was, and how reliably faithful everyone was, and we were in the current present moment, I would be much more concerned. Um, the story is, they dragged Jesus away to be crucified, and everyone ran off and hid. Um, and then they hid in a room for longer, and it's I agree. The resilience of the institution needs to account for that. So the moments of opulence are going to happen. The moments of people manipulating the institution for their monetary or sexual desires is going to happen.
Or
And
ideological.
what's
Or ideological,
or
right?
ideological, yes, or political, yeah, absolutely. And there needs to be a recentering. Now, the Christian myth is, people again going to hate that I'm not using myth in a way that it's fake, but the story, the narrative accounts for that, in that we continually mess up and have to come back to that which is greater than us. So I guess my sense is that the church has had a moment of institutional fail. The churches have moments of institutional failure. The the moment we are in right now, there's an abundance of explanatory narratives, like mediating narratives. How do we how do we explain all of these things we see? And I can go on the internet and explain things in 500 different ways. Um, but most people need one mediating narrative. Um, and to the extent, I mean, the you're left with the gospel, the good news is that is a attractive mediating narrative for many people and has been for generations. And I would say that at some level, the institution is relying on that mediating narrative, um, which I profess as true as a Catholic. When I'm speaking in generalities here, I think there are, I think in the abundance of narratives that we have, there's going to be attractor points within that, ideological or religious. And I think the institutions are kind of building around them, or the and those support some of I think those mythos are kind of core to these institutions. um and some of the creedal stuff is liturgical act, which is sort of binding of those institutions. um and so i i I'm going to be more practical now. Like, audit one's own life and thinking about their, if you think that institutions are important and this is a plausible way to think about the world, the audit of one's own life and like, all right, here are the institutions I participate in, here's why I participate in them, and this is what I am gaining from them, and making it conscious. There's so much below the waterline that we take for granted and we don't realize is fundamental to how we operate on a day to day. Like, if my grocery store no longer attaches to the supply chain, or if my payment systems break down, where do I go? Who do I go to? Um, and that's like a really subtractive way to think about it. And it's like feels doomeristic. But I think that's like, who am I relying on that I do not notice I'm relying on? And then treat those like participations. Like, I know the I go to the same grocery store most of the time, and I know the managers, I know the people there, and part of that's intentional. Like, I go to the same restaurants because I want to have a relational interaction with these things, which are feel like big corporates. But I know if push comes to shove and I show up the door and there's only so much rice in the back, they know me.
We're alike in this way, Paul. I'm the same way.
Now,
Eh, Go ahead.
but well, the speech that Rod gave, I'm going to clip out because this
I
is.
got more, Paul. I got more.
I know Rod can go on forever. Rod and I have gone on for hours. Rod and I got Joe Rogan has nothing on me and Rod. Some of our conversations have gone on a long time. But I love that speech that Rod gives right there because it is true and it is so important to hear. Now, where I want to sort of connect your paper that Rod didn't get a chance to read, and that was my fault, with Rod's argument is because I think underneath a lot of what Rod has said over the years is the question is the church not the universal basic institution? Because that question, I think, Rod and I will go way back, and he talks about walking past this, this abandoned church, or this church they're going to take down and put up and that's going to happen a lot in the next 20 years. And they're not going to be big, beautiful churches. They're going to be churches like Living Stones that, it could very well be that 10 years from now, you come to Sacramento, that where did Paul Vanderklay make all those wordy videos? And you're going to find a Taco Bell. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. But because these institutions are connected and there are hierarchies, and Rod himself said, we cannot understand Western civilization and the fruit that it has given us. And this is sort of Jordan Peterson's main thesis going back. You're going to have to somehow get into the question of, as you said, Paul, narrative, this narrative of voluntary self-sacrifice, which Jordan Peterson tends to point to, or then sort of housed and curated, there's a museum word, and nurtured by this vessel called the church. And of course, part of what is the really interesting conversation between Protestant and Catholic has everything to do with that vessel. And it has everything to do with that vessel physically. I mean, you can when you look at that church that you put up on the screen, you might say, boy, for a lot of years from the 50s to the 80s, what kind of churches were built in neighborhoods? What kind of Catholic churches were built in neighborhoods? They didn't have pictures of, they didn't look like that over the last 50 years. And of course, Rod can very quickly connect that up to movements in the art world, et cetera, et cetera. But when we look at when I looked at the Scott Adams online funeral, I saw there's been a digital substitution that has taken place. And I don't look at no, I'm sorry, I don't look at Scott Adams as an iconoclast. I mean, the Protestants certainly did that, and we keep getting crap for that from the Orthodox right now, the Orthobros. But the question is, did Scott Adams fail the institutions, or did the institutions fail Scott Adams? And of course, that goes both ways. But the primary question that we have to ask as a civilization, which we are having in spades right now as a culture, is, at least in the United States, can we actually continue to go on without a religion or a container for that religion? And of course, in the United States, we sort of pioneered, no, we are a secular state, but yet most people can look back in American history and say, we didn't we didn't have a state church. We didn't have the Church of England or the Church of Rome, but we had sort of a community of churches that were very comfortable being fuzzy about the distinctives that Rod doesn't have a lot of interest in necessarily, but that those agreements did help us provide that function, that temple, as you put it in your taxonomy, provided. And that was at the top of the hierarchy. And the way that sort of goes down is an orienting function that says, why is it important that we have space in a new subdivision? We reserve that little 5-acre lot on the corner, not for the Taco Bell, but for this funny little institution that actually, and we no longer do that, but we used to do that. And I mean, those are really the questions that are sort of grabbing us now as a nation when we say, and and my channel I've talked a lot about when I look at McLaughlin on talking to Alex O'Connor, everybody from the left now is like, we should have we want the church to do a better job, but we don't care to actually go to one because there are plenty of churches that believe like Rhett McLaughlin does. But why would he bother to show up on Sunday? But if he doesn't show up on Sunday, if he doesn't do the voluntary self-sacrifice of putting something in the plate, if he doesn't give his time, if he doesn't give his attention, if he doesn't give his children to that universal basic institution that might be the church, well, then potentially the whole society begins to say, or it can't even critique and say, well, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's some good stories, and there's some good movies there, but it doesn't last, and maybe that which makes us a we in Pageauian terms won't last. So I'll play Rod's speech all day long because I think he's right. And I love the fact that he comes into this religious group of people, and I want Rod to be more bold, and I'll just keep pushing him.
My my politeness gets in my way. By the way, on the Scott Adams thing, like I texted, or on our little signal thing, I I texted the other day to you and the group. I said, "This is big. What he's doing right now, he's inviting us to his deathbed.
Yeah.
Like that ritualizing death. Like we need updated rituals, and he's experimenting. He's leading the way." And I thought, like, that's very big what he's doing. Um, okay, this is probably the hardest thing that I or the harshest thing that I would have to say on the subject, present company considered. And so before I say it, I'm gonna tell a quick little story so you'll understand a little bit of the context. Paul, some of this PBK, some of this will sound familiar. So I was raised in a fundamentalist, Bible-based home church environment, and very, very strict. Um, no TV in the house, no radio in the house. Like we read the Bible every morning with my dad. Like this is
Rigor.
serious, right? Yeah. Of course, I hated it. But being the conscientious little kid I was, like I was also all in, like I hated it, but I just want to be normal, but I also wanted to participate. But I remember, so this particular group, doesn't matter. Details aren't important, and I'm not here to single anyone or anything out in particular. But one of their claims was that they went all the way back to the apostles, that they were the one true church. Sound familiar? um, and that they were the truth, capital T. And it had no beginning. There was no founder. There was no, it just goes all the way back, right? And of course, they couldn't have anticipated the internet. Um, so they didn't know that this lie, because that's what it was a lie, would ultimately be revealed, right? And I remember as a kid, it was so it was one of those groups, somebody from the old country, kind of a firebrand, split off from some tent revival thing in Ireland and came to the States and started setting up meetings all over the country and sending people out two by two. And during the same time that you've talked about many times, Paul, about that others were doing the same thing, right? And so he had a name, and you now on the internet you can find the newspaper article clippings about when this all happened, right? And then he kind of went crazy and like started declaring himself the Messiah and moved to Jerusalem and waited for Christ to return. Like it just went crazy. And then he was excommunicated. And but his fellow co-founders, some of them were still alive when I was a very small child. So I remember meeting them. They're like in their 90s, like one was over 100 years old, I remember. And so I've physically been in the same space with the guys who knew the truth. So I say that story so you understand a little bit about my formation, right? It's like you lied to me, right? You lied about something kind of important, right? Now, I would argue that that it was replete with lies, but that was one of those like it's a lie. I can use that word. I don't have to say it wasn't true. I don't have to say it was a misunderstanding. I don't have to say it's like, well, it's a matter of faith. Like, no, this was a lie. This was like there were people who knew. Now, I'm sure there were many who did not know. It was like that man's name was just erased from the history of the organization. It's like we just don't. It's like he who must not be named. And if you bring it up now, oh, I see you've been on the internet, right? So that will hopefully help you understand a little bit about my orientation and maybe some of the people out there watching too. Like, but again, my point is not to direct disproportionate critique in that direction because like this is the point I'm about to make, right? The truth ends up really mattering in terms of the health and life and sustainability of an organization. And my belief is that institutions, the real corruption has been to become extremely, let's say, flexible with the truth. And I understand that word, like, it's not as if I claim the truth or anything like that. It's just we know when we see that we have been deceived, right? Or misguided or misled or, right? And so my take on the last 500 years is little by little, the explanatory power of particularly the religious institutions, has been degraded by better explanations, right? And so instead of, many organizations have been like, well, we got to update our priors now because we have this new information. We know a lot more about the universe that we occupy and so forth, right? Many organizations have sort of plugged their ears and said, like, not listening, right? But just so I don't reserve my criticism for religious institutions, we also had the president of Harvard, testify to Congress that she couldn't she couldn't tell you what a woman was or whatever, right? Like so and the
Or
reason why
fudged
that
her
was so
footnotes.
also, right? The reason why that was so catastrophic is because the rest of us are watching. It's like you're embarrassing yourself right now. Yet within that cloistered environment, that hermetically sealed self-referential echo chamber, they had completely lost the plot in terms of an actual commitment to the truth, right? Of course, I could go on. I'll stop. But the, the the what I'm interested in is how often I see a lot of hand waving around, well, is it true or not, right? And even within the TLC, I'm surprised at how little I see engagement with, say, like a Dr. Bart Ehrman or like a James Tabor, like people, deep biblical scholarship who are at least challenging a lot of the premises behind, Christianity, right? And that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm challenging Jesus Christ, the historical figure, because like I actually, I kind of like that guy. But I have a lot of problems with the institution that has grown out of that movement. And I'm not going to be the first to say, I wonder what the man Jesus Christ would think of the movement that carries his name today. That is the harshest thing I can and will ever say about the subject, but that hopefully it will help you understand, where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Um, it's and I think these things are good to hear. Um, and I I came from a very equally equally religiously fervent, but theologically very different upbringing, which like things like evolution and literalism of Genesis, that sort of thing just was
Yeah,
sort of a non-issue.
right.
And so, and I'm thankful for that. I I think there's different layers of what is well, the senses of reality. I think there's this propositional reality thing which is important because people are, as I was saying, people are seeking a mediating narrative. What is the narrative that I can go through life and use it as a roadmap or a something that can direct me along the path. And if you come across a situation where your mediating narrative is in strong conflict with things you are perceiving or a alternative, someone else's map, and there's a strong conflict, it's going to derail your narrative. Um, and justifiably so. Like, throw out the term Bayesian updating. They're new facts, you change your beliefs. Um, as as you should. I I'm going to say something in Bayesian terms. I think the priors are broad enough. The possible beliefs on the propositional were broad enough in Catholicism that we could update to the new facts, and it didn't break the model. It just moved the emphasis. Um, and somebody can come on and disagree with me on that, and I'm fine with that. But I think the flexibility in there are a few different metaphysical, there are different metaphysical, there's a lot of argument on metaphysical backgrounds, and like there are a lot of scientists doing different things within the Catholic tradition that permitted some flexibility that allowed more updating. But I would say that we religion, the narratives, the explanatory narratives need to confront the perceived reality. And if you find it's a lie, that if you clear lies definitely invalidate things in the whole narrative. um I think the communal participation with your local, the locality of it is helpful in that most I am participating with this ancient tradition, but I'm also in a community of people who are right here trying to participate in this ancient community at tradition as a 21st century American in a specific place. And so I don't go to church with any first century Jews. Go to church with a bunch of people who are kind of like me, who are trying to participate in these liturgies as people in their own in the lived reality. I don't know if that helps answer. I don't think the point is to answer, but I think it's to explain that, yeah, I agree with you. There is a point. If this is that's the perspective, the propositional. If there is something fundamental participatory about the church or temple institutions that we need as orienting for us personally and then at us socially, we need to be able to look up at the same thing. If someone's worshiping Monet and somebody's worshiping Iron Man and somebody's worshiping Jesus, it's going to be a really difficult conversation. Uh, Having a common orientation permits a lot culturally. And that is embodied in acts of worship where people are sitting in front of sitting in front of the icon and meditating and looking up to it in an actual act, either at the art museum or in the theater or at church. And it can be a metaphorical icon if you're an iconoclast. Uh, uh, the so the common sip at the funeral thing was great. It's let's participate in a common cup, which we are all. It's the universality of this common act, which brings us back to our departed. All the times we've done this with our departed member. Um, my church does that. Um,
Very clever, Paul.
and no,
You're right.
it's not. And my point isn't that we we have this urge. We need to do this. We want this common. There's something fundamental in us that needs to do this. There's something social that we need this universal participation in this, in something of a community or institution. And we want. I think the question isn't anything. It's what's going to fill that role. What is that participation? Where should we be showing up? Because I think we're going to be showing up. We're going to need to show up somewhere.
And part of the there's a Jesus and Iron Man and Monet and the did the Scott Adams community have a name? Um, there's a la Jordan Peterson and Tom Holland, there's a connection running through all of these things. And Iron Man and Endgame is intelligible because of how it's downstream from the Jesus story and these narratives. But I think, Rod, I want to broaden, the power of your story because we are currently living in a time when the explanatory when we talked about mediating narratives, we talked about explanatory narratives, and in many ways, in an embodied way, what we're looking for is if I do these things, I'll get these good, blessed outcomes. And when you look at something like marriage, women who got married in the 1960s discovered in the 1970s that it wasn't enough to hitch your wagon to a man who was going to work for IBM and get his gold watch and get his retirement package, and you just needed to marry the guy and you were set for life. No, he dumped you for the secretary, and now the fact that you didn't study in college or get a college education, and the fact that traditionally you award the children to the woman, and he's got a pretty good lawyer, so he's not paying that much alimony. So now you're living in poverty. And so they, of course, always tell their daughters, now you're going to see a lot of romance about the man and stuff, but don't buy that. You had better secure for yourself a good education and a good career. Now, if you want to marry, marry for love, but keep your head about you. And if things start looking wobbly, get the hell out of there because after all, you can't trust him. But then you have the question of the container, which is marriage. And you have this on, well, if I go to work for IBM, I'll have a job for the rest of my life and I'll have a pension. And no, now it's up to you. There's no longer some pension managers that are going to, keep an eye on the stock market. You can keep your head down working on whatever it is, whatever widget your corporation is making, and your pension managers will make sure that when you retire, there'll be plenty of money for you. No, it's up to you to determine where you should put your money and what you should invest in. And so if you choose wisely, sorry, it was a defined contributions package. And we're just seeing this everywhere we go. And so then it's like, well, you began talking about the meta problem. Well, we had the poly problem, and the poly problem sort of yields into the meta problem that, well, what if the retirement system, I just, watched a video about what percentage of baby boomers are really only have Social Security. And I can put names on some of those things because I watch some people in my church try to live on Social Security. They're maybe in their third marriage, and the husband who owned the house died. He didn't have the house fully paid off. She doesn't have the income level to, her son. I mean, it just boom, 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 boom. Poly becomes meta very quickly, and poverty ensues. And so that it isn't disconnected from the fact that, doggone it, that pastor, I looked up to him. And or maybe it wasn't a pastor, maybe it was Philip Yancey, who sold 17 million Christian books about all of the nuanced and stuff about faith, and he carried on an 8-year affair. So suddenly it's not just the religious institutions, it's the marital institutions. And again, where this came up, universal basic institutions. And so then the young man says, so the young man is told, don't marry a woman because all that's going to happen is, when the whole thing breaks down, she's going to take half your money. You're better off, she'll probably sleep with you if you talk to her the right way and if you look the right way. And the last thing you want to do is marry her. But this is traveling through how many levels of our society. And of course, we have Vietnam and can we trust the government? Trump is changing a whole bunch of the undefined sort of pageantry of government and switching to, oh, we're going to build a ballroom. Oh, so this is, but again, I come back to, is the church the universal basic institution upon which all these other things sort of grow? And in some ways, the idea of secularism was, no, you don't really need that slot. That's just a slot. But when that slot gets removed, suddenly you begin to ask, what is filling that slot? And, I sometimes tell the story of a woman that I knew. It was her second marriage. It was his second or third marriage. He was quite a bit older than her. Wasn't a good marriage. They were estranged, but he's dying in the ER in a not a very elegant, quiet way. And though she's estranged, she's watching at least the children she had from him, in the tension of this. And her brother comes, and I knew both of these were raised in this church years ago. and they embrace in that waiting room off the ER, and they don't embrace each other and sing a song, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. They sing, You got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And I thought, why do I love Rod's speech? Because they sang that song. They didn't sing Great is Thy Faithfulness. They didn't sing Amazing Grace. They didn't sing how many Christian hymns I can think of. They sang a Kenny Rogers song that impacted them at a particular time in their life. But then I ask myself, would it have been better if, in fact, that universal basic institution had blessed them more? Would they have had a better song to sing?
Will you
Amen.
indulge me one story? Yes. Amen.
Please.
Because I think perhaps what might come out of this is the concept of a universal basic institution. I think my reaction to it, as immediate as it was, tells me that it's probably a very solid idea. The question of the versus a is probably where all the juice is, right? Is there such a thing as the universal basic institution, or are we really saying that we need them, but they might take a variety of forms? And to acknowledge the need for them is an important first step, say, right? Um, I tend to kind of hand wave around like the kind of stuff that I've been spending my time on because it feels self-indulgent. First of all, it's not really what this is about. But Paul, like it so informs the way I think about this stuff that I'd like sometimes I'm just like bursting at the seams to talk about like actual examples. So I thought of an example that that might be good here, right? So when I first got to Nashville, um, when I first like made it my permanent home, I was traveling here a lot. But about let's see, at the beginning of 2018 is when I made the actual move to become a resident of Tennessee officially for all tax purposes. Um, and shortly after that, I started this thing called Nuance Forum that you know about, Paul. And he actually came on our little group, right? And out of that, I met a whole bunch of really interesting people. But I started meeting all these musicians, right? And I have been starting nonprofits basically my entire adult life, and I get involved with this wonderful group. And so during COVID, we're all stuck. And there's one in particular. He was a recent immigrant. He's actually Filipino, but he immigrated from Sydney. Got joined up with a touring musician there, and she brought him to the United States, and so he was touring with her. And then COVID shuts everything down, and he's got nothing to do. He's like been here for like 2 months. He doesn't know anybody, right? And so he goes on to meet up and finds my little group, and we start becoming friends. And he just starts inviting himself over. He's a wonderful guy. You actually talked to him, Paul, on that stream. You might even remember him. He's one of these guys that just kind of creates his own weather. Just a delightful, delightful person, and ridiculously talented bass player. And so he invites himself over, and we're sitting on my back porch having veggie burgers. And I just got a new fridge like 6 months ago, and so we're cleaning out the old freezer, and I found one single veggie burger that was the was the artifact of that night because we there were three of us, and there's one frozen veggie burger still in there from that night back in I guess August, September of 2020. And so he's talking about this thing he used to do in Sydney, where on a Monday night they would have just a bunch of musicians get together, and they would just do kind of a jam. It was mostly covers and stuff like that. But because it's a relatively small community, when big acts come through, they'll do like the three major cities, right? Sydney and what, Brisbane and Adelaide or whatever. And so sometimes somebody big would come through and they'd sit in, so they had kind of some sort of buzz around it. And they did this every Monday night for years, right? And he was telling me about this, and he's like, like I kind of like to do something like that here. And he mentions like, but it would be for more like for songwriters because Nashville is a songwriter's town, right? And as soon as kind of like when I heard that's kind of my thing, by the way. It's like I hear a good idea, like I recognize it immediately. Like I don't even claim any other particular gift, but I know a good idea when I hear one. It's kind of like your idea, Paul. I said, you realize you just described what everyone thinks Nashville is. You show up. So what he wants to do is he wants to have like a essentially an open mic where you just come and and show us your song, right? And we'll have, at that point, it's COVID, so we have all these incredibly talented musicians with nothing to do, right? He says, what if we just back them up and we'll just play their songs? And I'm like, well, how are you going to do that? You've never heard the song before. So no, trust me, it's fine, right? And I'm like, how does this work exactly? So I say to him, I said, you just describe what everyone thinks Nashville is, right? You show up with a guitar and a song on your heart and a dream, and you're going to get discovered, and next thing you know, you're Chris Stapleton or whatever. It's like, well, actually, that's not really how this works. This is an industry town, right? So if you're like playing Broadway at noon to a bunch of drunk Midwestern, tourists, you may have peaked. That may be the best it ever gets for you, right? This is a hard town to break into, in terms of the industry, right? I'm like, but this would be amazing to create community around artists supporting each other, right? And so immediately, because of all the other things I had done that don't matter to the story, but I knew right away how you would go about doing that. So I said, let's start a nonprofit. And it's been going for 5 years now. Every Tuesday night, you just show up, you put your name on a list. It's random, so you don't know when your name's going to get called. So you can't just come play and leave. Like you got to wait, and you got to support all the other people playing, right? Which is one of the sort of little genius things, right? It's part of the liturgy, right?
Yep. Yep.
And if for the uninitiated, if you've never seen this before, you think you're witnessing magic, right? Someone gets up there and they'll do like, they'll, what is it, airdrop the thing? Maybe they have like a chorus, a verse and a chorus. Maybe they got some, in Nashville they call it the number system. So you like the basic chords. And they'll be like, okay, just give me the first line. And then they'll just start singing. Yep, yep, got it. And then boom, they'll spring into an entire song.
Just
right?
like in a movie.
Right. And it's like, if you don't understand how session players, how that whole industry works, you will think you're watching magic, right? Because it is that amazing. It's like you're seeing the artist going like, oh my God, like I'm hearing my song with a full band. We have sometimes 10, 11 people on stage, right? With horns, like the whole thing, right? And then of course we record it. It's all, so there's lots of content and you can post it to your Instagram, right? And so a whole beautiful thing has emerged out of this. We have marriages that have come out of this, right? Now some of these artists are getting they're actually getting opportunities. And so they're bringing other people along. If they go out on the road, they'll bring somebody to come play with them, right? So this is an example of why I talk the way I talk, right? It's like I knew right away that this would meet this third space need, right? Where it's a magical, beautiful musical experience. It has a lot of the things you're talking about, and it's become part of the community here, right? And of course, I've made innumerable friends as a result of this, and now I'm in the music business as a result of this, actually, right? So, um, I part of the reason I don't do this is because I'm not here to like, I don't want to be self-referential about this, right? Um, and and of course I love it and I'm excited about it, but I don't want to overstate my particular role. What I did is I saw the opportunity and I started bringing resources to help make it happen. I serve on the board and stuff like that, right? But my point is that I could tell you many more stories. I'll just give you a hint. Like, well, how about a bar napkin biennale? Like we started an arts collaborative. The very first thing we ever did is we got all the artists in town. We invited them to come create masterpieces on little bar napkins. And we had like 150 artists submit their work. We paid for our insurance policy for the first year just by having this fundraiser, right? And it was a beautiful thing. That's still going 15 years later, right? It's an arts collaborative. So there's all kinds of things like that that you can do to create community that have a kind of effervescence about them. And in a sense, the claims are implicit. Remember what I said earlier, the arts will save us. Like, well, I don't know if they're going to save us, right? But they'll inspire us. They'll bring us together, right? But they're not making any metaphysical claims. They're not making any claims that can be debunked, at least not yet, right? They're mostly just focusing on the deep human desire to come together around something, a common experience. And of course, music and art are both, I would say music is probably the most primal, the most sort of, base thing is, music in unison with other people.
Yes.
So I just tell that story, hopefully is kind of a source of inspiration. Like we can stand and watch our institutions crumble. And I'm not even interested in like lighting the match that makes it worse, right? Like I'm just more interested in like, well, that is what it is. Like none of that's particularly interesting to me, but what about this? Like right, we could do this. This would be great, right? So that again, thank you for indulging me because it's hopefully you see why it's related to the conversation. That's what I think of when I think about universal basic institutions. It might be in your town, it might be this, right? In another town, it might be that, right? But it's what it's doing is acknowledging the need for human beings to come together in this way.
And the once you see it, I think putting a name to something brings an intentionality and a focus to it. Um, so when we were at Midwestuary, we had a whole conversation about ballroom dancing and what the dating scene, the conversation went something like, what the dating scene really needs is ballroom dancing at churches, like, because something fun to bring people to bring the something to bring together couples and those seeking coupleship uh around something that's fun and communal and not Tinder. uh and I think we had, and like 4 or 5 guys had some past experience doing ballroom dancing. I mean, my wife and I have done classes at different times, and it's it's ideas like those where we need to sort of pitch them and set them up. And if you become aware that these are glues in our society, not a society is a big word. These are glues in our communities, um, and they are not optional for flourishing. They're part of flourishing. Um, and then once you're aware, then you can start. Like I can try to start an estuary, which is on my January, February things I want to do. Um, but I think there's that this is where the audit comes in. It's once you're aware, auditing where am I participating and where are there opportunities for bringing us together in some of these forums. And it may be ballroom dancing, it may be jam session, it may be a prayer group, um, but in service of some of the existing structures though too, like how do I make my church a more flourishing place? How do I make my workplace, well, how do I hate my workplace less? And how am I here? I'll be positive. How can I be pastoral as a manager of people who I'll tell this story. It's tough, and it could get me in trouble. But one of my guys died this
It's
year.
2 hours in. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
nobody's
But
listening.
nobody's
One of my
listening anyway.
guys died in the last 6 months, and that's and he was young and it was difficult. Um, and one of the people on my team told her to come in and bring her Bible because I knew she had her Bible at her desk, and that's how I told her what happened, and then we broke out the Bible and we read some verses together. Um, and that's how we did it. And then another guy, we didn't break out the Bible. We had the conversation about just like the times together, and you're pastoring as a manager in one of these big corporates. Um, but unless you see it as a institution, a communal institution that is essential, that is universal and like important as such, then I need there comes a new intentionality that now I view myself not only as a manager, I am a pastor for the folks on my team. And I mean that in a very generic shepherding view. So yeah, I'm mostly just agreeing with you, Rod. I don't I don't have any really skin in the game on the concept, like universal basic institutions. Like this is something that I think about, but like I I think we need to respond to the universal basic income thing and the in this dispersonal, like things are going to happen to me and they're going to come to me, and I'm not where, and refocusing just our attention on this institutional participation. Um, and if we do that, then we can start to embody and pass it off to Grim Grace for here. But
Well, Rod, your story is awesome. And part of the reason that, I mean, I never planned to have the TLC arrest you or any of that. I mean, it just sort of happened, but it happened by virtue of, multi-generational pastoral inheritances. And if there's one thing that you learn sitting down and doing what I've done on the internet, but have done long before that. And my father and my grandfather, I assume, have done. I never watched my father do it necessarily because he didn't do it in front of me. He was doing it at work and I was at school. But when you talk to people, you find out that they taste goodness. And that's really what your paper is about, Paul. Your paper is about goodness.
yes,
They taste goodness in many different places. It's sort of like Karen Wong telling the story about bumping into someone that says, when you get to the point where you know something well enough that you describe, that you discover there is no bottom, there's no bottom to paint, there's no bottom to milk. This is actually a very old theological idea that Calvinists and Roman Catholics share because they come through Augustine, that somehow at the source of the universe is the source of the universe is overflowing throughout much of it. And what I love about your story, Rod, is that even if we have a taxonomy where we have all of these things and we might figure out where we could put that funny little thing you had in the taxonomy, I would say it probably hits on almost all of them. And this is something that Rod and I talk about often, that everything, lately we've had Daniel Gardner and Cadell talk about, there's the theopolitical or the political economic, that all of these things are intertwined. And for that awesome little thing that's in Nashville where someone can go up on stage with a hope and a song and start strumming, and this studio musicians, they could never afford to purchase their time voluntarily just for the joy of it all, swell in, and suddenly this little song that they had sounds amazing, and they're having almost a bridal wedding moment where they are the best song, they're the best singer in the world, and this is the best song in the world, and Nashville itself is there to celebrate them. And of course, I as a pastor hear that, and I hear that sermonically, and I just pull in eschatology and soteriology and anthropology, and pull these all together and say you can taste the goodness of the world in that one little moment, and the beauty of the vessel, that is that thing that, I mean, one of the really pieces that I loved in that paper where, Paul, you describe the difference between the soldier and the teacher. The soldier and the teacher both contribute to something that they have in common, but the soldier and the teacher are very different. You don't want the teacher acting too much like the soldier, and you don't want the soldier acting too much like a teacher. They both have their roles to play. And Rod, I love that story because you know your role to play, and you have the gift of I hear an idea and I thought, there it is, it's right there. Now, how can we bring this potential out into reality? Oh, a vessel. We need an institution, and I'm good with creating a vessel. And I know that idea? No, 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 we're definitely not doing. I know you think it's a good idea, but because of all these other things, even though we've never done this before, I know where that goes. So we're going to cut that off right there. But I'm going to create this vessel and sort of like the story I tell about glory and the chef. The best chef knows how glory unfolds in the world, and the best chef does not walk around to every taster and say, I made that, I made that, I made that. The best chef sits back and watches the smile when they eat the cake and say, ah,
I'll
glory.
I'll tell you a quick little just an added anecdote to that. So the very first show, this is in the depths of COVID, right? It's September of 2020, and Nashville was opening up more than other parts of the country. So this part of the world, things did start to loosen up a little bit. So people were kind of going out, but masking and all that, right? And so Eric, the guy that I'm talking about, he talks a local bar. It was Belcourt Taps um, in Nashville to let him try this idea out, right? So good for them, right? They gave him a Tuesday night. That's why it's Tuesday night because it doesn't really compete with a lot of other things, right? And they're just trying to sell beer, right? So we show up, and this is the first time we've been out, right? Like we have not been going out, right? And so we show up at this bar, and they have a clear shower curtain like hanging from the front of the stage. So the band is going to perform on the other side of the shower curtain, right? So so Ann and I want to be right down front. So we sit right in front, right? And the whole night, it was just it was a beautiful night. It's standing room only. I'm thinking, I'm sure going to get COVID tonight, right? You get to the bar, you're trying to wheeze into somebody's face, like, right? This is a catastrophe. I just knew it. This is a super spreader for sure, right? But watching this band behind a shower curtain just play their hearts out, and a whole bunch of people got up that night, and it was that night or it was the week after that that Eric and Tabitha met. She came to one of his events. They are now married. I stood up with him at his wedding last April, and all these social circles emerged from that, right? And the surreal experience, and oh, I forgot. So they met and they got COVID the night that they met. That's what I'm saying. It was either that night or it was the next week, right? And so they've just started dating and now they're stuck together. So they basically spend like the next 2 weeks isolated together. And now we have a marriage out of this, right? So that was the other point of the story, right? It's the shower curtain. So just visualize that, right? This whole COVID insanity, and then a marriage emerges, and it's just a joyful, beautiful story all the way around. So that's just another added little piece of that story.
Yeah. And that's the way this world works with the trauma binding and the glory and
Yeah, you
and the
can't, as a
roles we
pastor, you
play.
cannot sanction that kind of behavior, but it worked out for them.
You'd be surprised what pastors do. So, well, let's land the plane here because I've got some pastoral duties I have to attend to. Maybe both of you some final observations or final comments, and then we'll see where this thing goes.
Paul, I'll let you conclude because it's your idea. What I've talked enough. What I will say is what I've said, which is this deserved. I was the one instigating to I want to talk about this more because I think you're onto something. I think it's a nice, tidy, protein rich little idea, well labeled, but of course expands into like some really, really, really deep questions and points of discussion, and probably generative for the whole discussion of the future of TLC and estuary as well.
Yeah,
Probably, right?
yeah.
So I think you're onto something. I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad that I could at least try to keep up. And so keep thinking about it, keep chewing on it, and the rest of us will follow your lead.
who I am as a person is I like to think about things. In grad school, they call me the ideas guy, as I always had some harebrained idea. Um, and you need ideas guys, and you need curators, and you need people who can accelerate. And I'm okay being the ideas guy. I don't need to fly the plane. I just want to write some of the software, you know. And what would be a blessing to me is if people like Paul or Rod just point me to a thing you want me to think about. Tell me what you want me to contemplate, and I'll do it. I, and I may not come up with anything, but I'll think about it. Like, it's such a blessing. I told as I guess before the recording, but I'm going through the Psalms one by one and doing meditation and journaling basically on that psalm and tying it into the things I'm thinking about. And that's awesome in that it directs sort of the wandering mind. And then but like the way I think, like, okay, tie things together, it's building up to something. There'll be presentation, not here but at church, on the Psalms. But if there's I've always wanted, I would love like John Vervaeke or you, Paul, or Rod, like just to say, oh, I need more people thinking about this. And just go out and meander around and see what happens. And so that's and I guess it's too that there's just different roles in this. I guess I'll end with a story. Um, about a year ago, I was getting really worked out mentally about the AI stuff because I I'd been sitting on it and I started playing out the ramifications. And I like literally I wrote stuff up and I emailed I like cold called theologians in the US, like like serious people with Vatican sort of connections, like, hey, this is what I'm seeing on this, just making sure. Um, but I was really, and so there was like a president of a university who was talking at our church, Catholic university. And so I knew him. So I talked to him. I was like, hey, I'm really concerned about this. And what do I do? I need spiritual direction on this. I have this on my heart, and it's important to me to talk about it because I think it's meaningful. Anyway, meta crisis. We don't need to explain that all here, but I think his question, all right, what's the platform, and how are you pushing that out? And I think part of this conversation is out of that, which is I need to, like, if something's really on my heart and it seems important, I need to platform it to some extent and be open to talking about it. And I do that ruthlessly at work. And those conversations are really fun. But I think there's also we need to talk about these things in the TLC or whatever these adjacent spaces are, and really sit with the institutions that we are with, um, and sustain them. But anyway, all right, I appreciate you, Paul, giving me kind of this platform to just talk about things I think about. It's a true blessing to me. It's a spiritual gift, so I appreciate that.
Well, I sort of see the TLC in some ways analogous to Rod's music thing, where
It's
it's kind of what we do. It's somebody has an idea, and it's like, well, let's get them up there, and let's see if we can polish up that idea a little bit, and then, we're maybe sort of an organic intelligence chat bot where somebody gets an idea and Luke's going to run with it on his morning thing, or Sam's going to do a thing on it, or I mean it just kind of goes out, and some things don't produce much, but you never quite know where things are going to go. So I really appreciate your openness with it, and I'm going to run with your paper a little bit more, so because I thought there are a lot of really good ideas in there that could just use some. It's very concentrated, very dense. I want to expand them out a little bit and draw connections to them, and because that's the role that I play in this whole thing, this whole weird thing. So,
have at it. I've all of this is freely given, so please.
all right, very good. I think we're landing the plane, and thank you both for your time, and
Thank you.
thank
Enjoyed it.
you everyone who's watched for your time and attention.